evening and welcome along to Wednesday evening's edition of Mesme Politics. My name's Toby Lepati Mesme. Wednesday night, just gone 7 o'clock on the 16th of December 2020. Gonna be a slightly longer show tonight, we've got lots to get through. Bringing you the latest in UK and US politics from a leftist perspective. That's what we're all about. Live, interactive, get in touch in the chat with anything you want to say at any point. Very pleased to have you with us this evening and welcome along on tonight's show. The last Pmqs of 2020. Gridlock on a stimulus in the States, and Mayor Pete Buttigieg has finally got an appointment in the Biden cabinet. The utter nonsense, the fallacy, the ongoing fallacy of the Christmas lockdown rules in the UK. More on that. But as we say, we're starting off with the very last PMQs of the year. Save Parliament staying for longer than we think it will because of Brexit, etc., etc. In which case, of course, there's a possibility of a Christmas time PMQs, but it's overwhelmingly likely this was the last PMQs. And as part of what I hope to be a new thing in the new year, we're going to go through the exchange between the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. Pick through it, offer analysis on it. So, starting off, the first question of the last Prime Minister's questions between Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer of 2020.
Go to the Leader of the Opposition, Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his good wishes to all the staff, to the armed forces and our emergency services? And can I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and the House authorities for doing all that you've done this year to keep Parliament safe and open in challenging circumstances. Mr. Speaker, since this is probably the last PMQs of the year, I want to look at some of the decisions the Prime Minister's made in the last 12 months. Let me start at the beginning of the pandemic, when images from hospitals in Italy and Spain were being shown on our televisions and the infection rates were rising in the UK. Does the Prime Minister now accept that his slowness to respond led to more deaths, a longer lockdown and a deeper economic damage?
Mr. Speaker, no, because at every stage we followed the scientific guidance and continue to do so. And he's right to draw attention to what's happening across the whole of Europe, and indeed there are spikes now taking place across the whole of the EU. And thanks to the tiering system that we have in place in large parts of the country, thanks to the heroic efforts of the people of the northwest, of the northeast, Yorkshire, Humber, we're seeing those rates coming down. And yes, it's true that we have spikes now in some parts of London and the southeast, but we will make sure that with our adjustments to the tiering that we conduct over the next few weeks, that we will address those issues. That is the right way forward for this country. That's how we'll defeat the virus, with vaccines, with community testing, and with tough tiering. And I think what people would like to hear in this season of goodwill to all men is a little bit of support from the right honourable gentleman for what the government is trying to do to beat coronavirus, and perhaps just a little less carping.
Now, this is classic, right? Keir Starmer starts off strong, pointed question, right to the core of the argument. It's obviously the handling of COVID is a sore point for Johnson and the government. People know that it didn't go well. They don't necessarily think that any other government would have done better, but people know there's something went wrong. This taps into that. Johnson's response, again, he's on the defensive. That's where you want to get the Prime Minister in these exchanges. But towards the end, and I know plenty of us sort of balk and go, ugh, at the sort of, oh, show some support and all that nonsense. And yeah, it is ridiculous. This is Prime Minister's questions, not Leader of the Opposition's questions, or be nice to Boris questions. But at the same time, lots of people, sorry, voice break there, lots of people like that act. They like that shtick from Johnson, right? A lot of people in this country, do not underestimate how many there are, like it. They'll watch that and go like, go on, Boris. You know, just people who go about their everyday lives. These are not like sycophantic Tories or anything. Just people like Boris Johnson. That's something that needs to be addressed, because Keir Starmer, yes, he's making great points. Is he coming across as likeable and relatable? We'll see as we dive in further.
Keir Starmer.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister won't listen to me, can I quote his own spending watchdog, the Office of Budget Responsibility? Because they said the UK locked down later and for longer than some of its European neighbours and experienced a deeper fall and slower economic recovery. Mr. Speaker, this isn't bad luck. It's not inevitable. It's a result of the Prime Minister's choices. But if the Prime Minister disagrees with me, perhaps he can tell us, why does he think that Britain, the sixth richest country in the world, with all our brilliant scientists and amazing NHS, ends the year with one of the highest numbers of COVID deaths in Europe, over 64,000, each one leaving a grieving family, and the deepest recession of any major economy? Why does he think that has happened?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the House will have noted his slight change of tune in his criticisms of the UK performance, but perhaps he could tell me why it is that why the UK is the first to produce a viable treatment for coronavirus in the form of dexamethasone, or the first country in the world to roll out a clinically tested stage 3 vaccine. Mr. Speaker, this is a pandemic that has affected the whole of Europe, and this government has continued to take the tough decisions necessary to beat it. And I may say so, Mr. Speaker, without wishing to cast aspersions on the point of view of the honourable, right honourable gentleman. I would take his criticisms of the UK government's decisions a little more seriously, frankly, if he had been able to decide last week or even the week before whether he even supported the approach we were taking or opposed it. He couldn't do either, Mr. Speaker. He abstained.
They're now getting into it. This is, they're going with the same thing every time now. We know what to expect. Originally, there was a lot of speculation. What is Prime Minister's questions between Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer going to be like? Well, we know the drill by now. Keir Starmer makes some good points, looks statesmanlike, manages to convince a pretty big segment of the country that he is a potential Prime Minister. Same time, Johnson plays to the crowd, accuses Starmer of being slippery, of sitting on the fence, and indeed of just not being a bit of a killjoy, talking down Britain. And both approaches have their merits, right? And the huge benefit for Johnson is he gets to talk last, which sets him at an advantage automatically. Now, I like what Starmer's going with, going back over the year. It needs to be done. We need to see scrutiny on things like this. He's got his numbers. Johnson is being put on the defensive. You always want to keep putting him on the defensive, but then every time he's coming back with, "Oh, we've achieved this, we've achieved this, we've achieved this," and for a certain group of people that will resonate. And this is the problem. Johnson is faced with all these crises he's presided over, all these catastrophic failures of statehood, or statesmanship, and statecraft. And they can't pin him down on it, because all he'll do is go, "Oh, no, I'm doing my best, stop talking down Britain," and people will go, "Yeah, all right, go easy on him," etc., etc. It's not great.
Mr. Speaker, I said 2 weeks ago at this dispatch box that I was very concerned that Tier 2 would not be strong enough to hold the virus. The Prime Minister said, "Don't worry about that, just support us, throw away the problems." 2 weeks later, what have we got? The virus rising in Tier 2 and Tier 3, and I'll come back to that. But if the Prime Minister thinks that the highest death numbers and the deepest recession is somehow delivering for the British people, he's a long way removed from the truth. The problem is the Prime Minister makes the same mistakes over and over again. And 2 weeks ago, he unveiled that latest COVID plan. He told the House, as he's done so many times before, that his plan would suppress the virus. But the latest figures show the opposite, and the Prime Minister said spikes here and there. Let me tell the House, in 3 out of 4 Tier 2 areas, infections are going up. In over half of the Tier 3 areas, infections are going up. Exactly the concern I put to the Prime Minister 2 weeks ago when he said, just back us anyway. As a result, this morning, 10 million people moved into tougher restrictions, exactly what we said would happen, going up the tiers. Does the Prime Minister not recognise that his latest plan has once again failed to control the virus, protect the NHS and our economy?
Mr. Speaker, once again, he criticises the government's plans without producing any kind of plan of his own. And actually, if you look at what is happening, he was the mastermind author of I seem to remember, of the Labour firebreak in Wales, Mr. Speaker. But if you look at what is happening across the country, it is thanks to the efforts of the British people that we are seeing significant reductions in the virus in some of the areas where it was really surging, and that is because of the hard work of the people of this country. And we will, of course, be continuing to reflect that as we go forward with the tiering approach. And we will continue to roll out the vaccine and roll out community testing, Mr. Speaker. And I may say, I think that his time would be better employed supporting those wonderful initiatives, supporting community testing, encouraging people to get a test, encouraging people to get a vaccine, rather than continually attacking what the NHS and what the government is trying to do.
Now, that was a good hit by Starmer. He laid out the facts very clearly, speaks for itself. That's not really defensible, is it? That record that Johnson is having to stare down, that he's being faced with, it's not defensible. It's been a disaster. Everyone knows it's a disaster, and Keir Starmer is speaking to the rightful feeling of quite a lot of resentment in Britain, in communities, particularly in the north, that feel like they have once again been shafted by the national government. They've been left behind. They feel powerless. These are all the things Johnson tapped into to win that stonking majority. But Keir Starmer can also tap into these things because the government has left these communities behind. Now we're at the halfway point. On we go.
I've encouraged everybody to have the vaccine every time I've stood up and talked about it. But the Prime Minister is just avoiding the issue. In some places, Prime Minister, in the last 7 days, infection rate has gone up 70%. Everybody knows this is a problem. The Prime Minister is yet again pretending it isn't. Another major mistake of the last 12 months, losing public trust. We all know what the tipping point was. The 520-mile round trip to Barnard Castle and the humiliating way in which the Prime Minister and his cabinet chose to defend it. And now we learn that while the Prime Minister and the Chancellor are telling the armed forces, police officers, care workers and firefighters that they will get a pay freeze, Dominic Cummings has been handed at least a £40,000 pay rise. How on earth does the Prime Minister justify that?
Mr. Speaker, he totally trivialises the efforts of the British people in getting the virus down. He says, he says that that none of the lockdown measures have worked. It's absolutely untrue, Mr. Speaker. From November the 5th to December the 3rd, the people of this country came together once again to get the virus under control, and they may have made a huge amount of progress. We will continue with that tiering system, and we will get that virus down. And that is the best way forward for this country. All he wants to do, Mr. Speaker, is to lock the whole country down. He's a one-club golfer. That's the only solution he has. And then, Mr. Speaker, all he does is attack the economic consequences of lockdowns.
This isn't America. This is Trumpian politics. It's not going to work. It didn't even work in the election in the States. It worked to an extent. Certain communities that might have gone for Biden went for Trump, had a fear of harsher lockdowns, but here, we're a very pro-lockdown country. People thought we weren't. People were like, Britain's very libertarian. They won't put up with any lockdowns. You know, the British people, they won't back down. No, people were fine with it. And that misreading of public opinion, that's the door at which much of the blame for Johnson's triangulation could be placed at the beginning of March. But Johnson sounded and looked ridiculous there. And not many people would disagree with that. Starmer is holding steady. You know, no one's going to defend the Barnard Castle thing. That was the point that trust in the government took a nosedive. And they've still not come back from that. You know, they lost their 20-point lead. They're now in a dead heat or a small lead. Johnson knows that he's got him there. It looks tricky for Johnson to come back and win this. So Keir Starmer, right now, on his way to winning the first PMQs, the last PMQs of the year. We continue. 2 more.
Mr. Speaker, you could script that from October and November when he was saying a lockdown's the last thing the country needs, disastrous. 2 weeks later, he put it on the table and voted for it. Ridiculous. It's exactly the problem what we've got. Not learning from mistakes. And obviously we know about Dominic Cummings. It wasn't performance-related pay, Mr. Speaker. But I think the British people will find it pretty hard to understand why it's one rule for our key workers and another for his advisors. And it's now likely that the next big mistake will be over the easing of restrictions over Christmas. And this isn't smarmy lawyers. Let me give you the British Medical Journal. The British Medical Journal yesterday said this: "We believe the government is about to blunder into another major error that will cost many lives." The Prime Minister should listen to that advice, not just ignore it as usual. And if he really is going to press ahead with this, can he tell us what's the assessment, and has it been done, of the impact that it will have on infection rates and increased pressure on the NHS? What's the impact?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I wish he'd had the guts just to say what he really wants to do, which is to cancel the plans people have made and cancel Christmas. I think that's what he's driving at, Mr. Speaker. He's looking a bit blank. I think that's what he's driving at. But I can tell him that as of today, and just this morning, there is actually, as I say, unanimous agreement across all the UK government, across all the devolved administrations, including members of all parties, Mr. Speaker, including his own, that we should proceed in principle with the existing regulations, Mr. Speaker, because we don't want to criminalise people's long-made plans, Mr. Speaker, but we do think it's absolutely vital that people should, at this very, very tricky time, exercise a high degree of personal responsibility, especially when they come into contact with elderly people, and avoid contact with elderly people wherever possible. And that is how, by being sensible and cautious, not by imposing endless lockdowns or cancelling Christmas, as he would appear to want to do. That's the only implication I can draw from what he's said, Mr. Speaker, unless he wants to announce some other idea. That is the way we will continue to work together to keep this virus under control, to defeat it and take the country forward.
Keir Starmer.
You see, the thing here is, again, Johnson sounded, looked ridiculous, irritating, confrontational, complete turn-off politically to moderate voters back during the parliamentary wranglings of 2019. And lo and behold, won over Middle England, won over plurality of voters in the country, and won an 80-seat odds-defying majority. Here's why it's a little bit different. Back then, a lot of people said, I cannot stand the man, but I can't stand Jeremy Corbyn. I don't want Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister. Corbyn's approval ratings were dire. And there was a broad consensus in the country that people did not want Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister. The majority of the country. Now, obviously, that's a view I and most of you listening, or all of you listening, would wholeheartedly disagree with, but that's where we were at that point. Now here, right now at least, Keir Starmer is an acceptable individual, an acceptable candidate in the eyes of the public. So, if Johnson turns off the middle with his ludicrous, smarmy whining about cancelling Christmas while the majority of the public would support tougher measures over Christmas to keep people safe, and at the same time, you know, he might get 30% on this, he's cancelling Christmas, he's talking down Britain, but, you know, a lot of people, the people that he'll need to get a majority, are not buying this. They're not, because it's ludicrous. And because Keir Starmer's there, That poses a much bigger threat to him than it did when he had Corbyn, who had the worst polling of a leader of the opposition since records began at that point, because the ratings had sunk so low. Now, Starmer has better ratings than Johnson, albeit the direction of travel is shifting, and it's not looking good. Right now, it's not looking good. A poll yesterday that was taken, if that poll was reflected, 41%, 41%, then Labour would be in a position to form a minority administration, and Johnson would be turfed out from number 10. He really needs to sort it out. There was talk earlier of a less confrontational style from the PM. This isn't less confrontational. This is the same old, same old. We know how it ends. We know it doesn't work.
Here we go again, Mr. Speaker, ignoring the medical advice. And we know where that leads because we've seen what happened in the last 9 months. And whatever the Prime Minister says, there's no escaping the brutal facts that Britain has one of the highest number of COVID deaths in Europe and the worst economic damage. Mr. Speaker, as this is the last PMQs of the year, I, for one, often wonder where the Prime Minister gets his advice from. Well, now I know, because I've heard the official newsletter of the Wellingborough Conservative Party. It's not on everyone's Christmas reading list, but it is a fascinating read, because it gives a lot of advice to wannabe politicians. It says this: say the first thing that comes into your head. It'll probably be nonsense. You may get a bad headline, but if you make enough dubious claims fast enough, you can get away with it. And it includes the December edition, the advice. Sometimes it's better to give the wrong answer at the right time rather than the right answer at the wrong time. So my final question to the Prime Minister is this: is he the inspiration for the newsletter, or is he the author?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think what the people of this country would love to hear from the right honourable gentleman this season of goodwill is any kind of point of view at all on some of the key issues. I mean, this week he couldn't make up his mind whether it was right for kids to be in school or not, and havering completely. He couldn't make up his mind last week whether or not to support what the government was doing to fight COVID, and told his troops heroically to abstain. He couldn't make up his mind about Brexit, you'll seem to remember. We don't know whether he'll vote for a deal or not. Mr. Speaker, he can't attack the government. He can't attack the government if he can't come up with a view of his own. Mr. Speaker, in the words of the song, from all I want for Christmas is a view, Mr. Speaker. And it'd be wonderful if he could produce one. This government is getting on with delivering on the people's priorities. We're 20,000 more police, 50,000 more nurses, 48 new hospitals, and Mr. Speaker. And although it has been very tough and very difficult, and everybody appreciates the suffering and hardship that the people of this country have been going through, we are, by rolling out the vaccine, by community testing and by tough tiering, which I hope he supports, we are going to defeat coronavirus, Mr. Speaker, and we're going to take this country forward into a great 2021.
Strong ending from Johnson there. Strong ending from Johnson. Right at Starmer's Achilles heel on the matter of, make a view, get a view on whatever issue it is. Starmer's apparently going to try and rectify that in the new year. 2021 very much going to be the year of policy rollouts from the Labour front bench, which we look forward to seeing, and seeing if the 10 pledges are, of course, stuck to. Starmer won PMQs there. Johnson got in some good hits at the end. A couple of Johnson's responses were bluster and nonsense and clearly, flailing. A few of them with a sort of bombastic rhetoric that very often does excite voters and people like to see. Starmer, stellar. Last question, excellent. Bit less of a suit. He actually had a personality. It was funny. Made him look like a bit of a buffoon. Great. That's what has to be done. That worked. More of that, please. So Starmer won. By no means was it a shocking blowout, but not a great PMQs for Johnson. He survived. We live to fight another Christmas, but no, not far from ideal, because, you know, I mean, it's just not being called out like that. Being, you know, the leaflet, the this, the that, the other. It, you know, bravo, Keir Starmer, is all I have to say on the matter there. Bravo, Keir Starmer. Well done. Good effort. And as for Johnson, you know, he knows his responses. He's going to have to come up with some new lines in the new year other than just, oh, well, if he supports the government, blah, 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 blah. But, you know, Starmer got out of his rut a bit. Johnson's still in his rut, but there we go. And that wraps up the Pmqs section of the show today. Now, over to US politics. There is huge gridlock over a stimulus agreement in the States, over getting aid out there to people. There's been a meeting between Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, so House Speaker, Senate Minority Leader, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and Kevin McCarthy, the House Minority Leader. That's where we are. They've all four of them have met at the behest, the courtesy of Nancy Pelosi. They're all banging their heads together. No coconuts have fallen out yet. We haven't got an answer. I'll just read you this from the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, which is not a paper I frequent, but here we go. Congressional negotiations on spending and economic relief picked up speed Tuesday as top lawmakers met late into the evening, a sign that negotiations are reaching a critical stage. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin joined the four by phone, the frightening foursome. Negotiations on COVID-19 relief intensified. The leaders continued to hold talks in hopes of finally cementing an agreement that would revive subsidies for businesses hit hard by the pandemic, help distribute new coronavirus vaccines, fund schools, and renew soon-to-expire jobless benefits. Apparently, there's reason to be upbeat. Apparently, we're getting somewhere. There have been good noises from all sides, which we like to see, we like to hear. However, there are a few red lines in this. Don't let the Democrats can't capitulate on this and betray their working class constituents. Don't let the immunity clauses that would make various corporations immune for any damages during COVID, and basically forsake any responsibility for harm done to workers or customers, etc., during a pandemic. Don't let those clauses into the legislation. I don't care how much the GOP push for it. Get on national TV and go, look, we have an agreement. It's ready to go. But the Republicans want to make big corporations immune to damages. And that's why I can't sign it. Because I have a feeling the public will be pretty sympathetic. The American people will be pretty sympathetic to that argument, and the Republicans will be quite embarrassed and sort of step down quietly. Same time, get aid for the states. If possible, get aid for the states in. Because it's all well and good going, we're not going to commit to huge austerity here at the federal government. If you don't get aid to the states, you do what the Tories are doing here, but on a bigger scale. You push crippling cuts to budgets, crippling austerity in the middle of an economic crisis down to the states, which is not only will cause immense human suffering, but it will also cripple the economic recovery, and we'll have another lackluster economic recovery like we did last time, and more needless pain, suffering, resentment in the middle of a pandemic, which not only economically ridiculous, humanitarianly repugnant, is also politically dangerous. It's going to create mass, if you think politics was volatile now, wait for 4 years of more stagnation, and it'll be really volatile. You won't have seen anything yet. And of course, worst case scenario, what I think we'd all advise them to do is just pass the damn thing, right? Pass it, but ensure in passing a smaller version of it, make sure there are checks in, stimulus checks to people, not large corporations, A lot of the wrong people in the wrong way got the money. Joe Biden spoke to that recently. And make sure the immunity clauses are out. Those have to be the red lines. If we're going with, all right, we'll come back to the table with a new administration, possibly a blue Senate, maybe not. Let's pass a temporary one now so that faith in democracy isn't completely shattered and it doesn't become clear that gridlock means people can't even get together in the middle of a pandemic. We'll pass it, but you have to get the checks in, okay? We can all agree on the checks, surely. I mean, some of them can't, but it's just got to be done. At the same time, immunity clauses out. Get them out. And I want Republican officials on national television explaining why in God's name they want to make large corporations immune in the middle of a pandemic, okay? Why? Is there any way you can sell that policy? I don't think you can. And I think Democrats have to get louder and start making noise about these things and go, look, they're asking us to do this. It's ridiculous. Do you agree with this? And they'll start backing down. Let's not repeat the mistakes of the Obama years. Let's really let these people have it. In other news, Joe Biden has announced his Secretary of Transportation.
And Katie, it's also interesting that this is coming as we are getting the news about Pete Buttigieg as the nominee for Transportation Secretary. Buttigieg is one of those people, as we've been talking about this transition, we talk about them in terms of the positions that need bodies, not the individuals who need positions. Buttigieg is certainly one of the most high-profile picks so far, the first of that very crowded former Democratic field. And in another president's cabinet, maybe the transportation secretary isn't a glamorous, high-profile job. But let's just remember how much Joe Biden loves trains, how much he talks about transportation, how much infrastructure is important for his agenda. This event today is actually at a former rail yard, so an important signal, I think, of how much he values this position that he's nominating Pete Buttigieg for it.
And Amtrak is in dire straits around the country. There's lower ridership. They need the money. There's also some crumbling infrastructure, including here in the tri-state, infrastructure that if it was wiped out or if there was a problem with it, if there was a massive delay, would cripple the country's economy. A big chunk of the GDP flows through here on those Amtrak tunnel lines.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching
Right, so Pete Buttigieg is, out of the entire field of candidates that ran against Joe Biden, this guy is not qualified and he's an absolute grifter, okay? He's like Obama or Kennedy, but with even less principle and none of the charisma, all right? It's pound shop Bill Clinton. The guy is an establishment Democrat, and you can already see how they line this up. This guy is in. They put Buttigieg in before Sanders, which is an illustration. And I still am very skeptical Sanders will get anything. I don't think he will. I really hope he does, though. The fact they've put Buttigieg in before Sanders demonstrates to us all, it's an ideological statement, but also it shows that, the contempt that they hold the Democratic base in, right? And, this guy who's basically a nobody is in, whereas someone who represents basically half the party, more than half the party in terms of policy, Bernie Sanders, where the heart of the Democratic Party was with Bernie Sanders. They voted for Biden out of feigned arguments of electability. That's what persuaded them. They didn't think Joe Biden's my candidate because I think he's the best the policy guru. They'd have gone for Sanders or Warren. They went for Biden because he said, I'm the only one who can beat Trump. And look, this guy, you can already see the corporate wing of the Democrats setting up Kamala Harris to run in 2024, 2028, and then probably with Buttigieg as her running mate, and then, you've got Buttigieg all set up for 2032. Far way ahead to look, but you can see them stitching it all up. Just keep the line of succession going, so there's no room, ever, for someone like Bernie Sanders to get anywhere near the nomination ever again. That's the goal. They won't succeed in that goal forever, but that's what they're trying to do. And it's, I don't care for it, basically. Pete Buttigieg is, I'm sure he's a nice guy, but he is beholden to corporate interests. He has no principles. I have not seen anything remotely impressive from him, and I know this is harsh, but it's a nothing story. It's a nothing story. Quickly moving over to the situation with the EU. Negotiations continue. With the European Union, it carries on. I'll just read you this. British and EU negotiators were closing in Wednesday on a deal to oversee fair competition in a post-Brexit trade deal, but remained deeply divided over fishing. As intense talks continued in Brussels, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the next days are going to be decisive. Many supposed deadlines have already been missed, the EU chief admitted, but with 2 weeks until Britain leaves the EU single market, time is finally running out. We'll have a listen to Ursula here.
As things stand, I cannot tell you whether there will be a deal or not. But I can tell you that there is a path to an agreement now. The path may be very narrow, but it is there. On fisheries, the discussion is still very difficult. We do not question the UK's sovereignty on its own waters, but we ask for predictability and stability for our fishermen and our fisherwomen. And in all honesty, it sometimes feels that we will not be able to resolve this question. But we must continue to try finding a solution, and it is the only responsible and right course of action. Honourable members, the next days are going to be decisive, and I know I have said this before, and I know deadlines have been missed time and again. As in the past, we must all walk these last miles in the same shoes. Thank you so much, and long live Europe.
Right, so this is all domestic politicking from Boris Johnson. There's a deal there for the taking. There are concessions we know he's going to make. It's all for the domestic audience's benefit. Europe aren't impressed. Something will scrape over the line, save a dramatic failure of statecraft. So my message to Boris Johnson is sort out the damn deal, get it over the line. There are going to have to be trade-offs. If you want more autonomy, you're going to have to lose access to the single market. If you are willing to sacrifice a small amount of autonomy with the promise of maybe some tariffs down the line, if you fancy, downgrading rights and standards, then you're going to have to make that compromise, and then you have access to the single market. It's as simple as that. If you want more access, you have to concede more. We know that's how this works. We know we don't hold many of the cards. We know we'll hold even less of the cards if there's a crash out. We know who'll be hurt more by a crash out. And I think the position we should take on the left is basically whatever deal this guy's going to come back with is obviously going to be rubbish because it's Boris Johnson negotiating it. It's the Tories negotiating it. It's steeped in libertarian separatist dogma. But it will be better than nothing. And I will reserve judgment on the deal until I see the deal and I consult various people on their views on the deal, make my own views on the deal, and then I can, give a qualified view on the deal. But by all accounts, it's not going to be a great deal. It's going to be better than nothing. It's certainly going to be better than a no deal. And I'm sure we'll be returning to the Brexit story some point this year, probably in that weird gap between Christmas and New Year. There'll be a sudden flurry of Brexit-related stories, although hopefully we get the deal sorted out this week. Hopefully. Though we are on Wednesday now. That Sunday feels like ages ago, doesn't it? Okay, more nonsense regarding Christmas rules. Absolute nonsense. Wales will enter a full lockdown after Christmas. Nicola Sturgeon is urging Scots to spend Christmas at home, not form any unnecessary social bubbles. The rules that were agreed between all the nations have not actually been disregarded. Johnson said it was completely unified, and then suddenly Wales and Scotland basically said no, not particularly. We're looking at this in a different way, Sonny Jim, and that's essentially where we are at the moment. And Johnson has done a press conference. The shift the government has made appears to be from free-for-all to we're leaving the rules as they are, we're accepting this was an own goal, but, you know, please be careful, please don't see old people, but we can't stop you. We're not, quote-unquote, cancelling Christmas. Have a listen.
We're collectively, across the UK, governments at every level, asking you to think hard and in detail about the days ahead and whether you can do more to protect yourself and others. We're keeping the laws the same, but we all want to send the same message. A smaller Christmas is going to be a safer Christmas, and a shorter Christmas is a safer Christmas. When we say 3 households can meet on 5 days, I want to stress that these are maximums, not targets to aim for. And of course, it's always going to be safest to minimise the number of people you meet. And that means that if you're visiting others over Christmas, we're asking you, in the 5 days beforehand, as early as this Friday, to reduce the number of people you're in contact with to the lowest possible, because obviously this virus spreads through human contact. If possible, don't travel from a high prevalence to a low prevalence area, and avoid staying away from home overnight if you can. Remember, the vaccine is on the way, and our aim is to inoculate everyone who is clinically extremely vulnerable or elderly in the early months of next year. So, if you're elderly, the best way to minimise your personal risk is to wait to be vaccinated before spending time indoors with others. And if you have an elderly relative, you might want to delay seeing them until they've been vaccinated. So, have yourselves a merry little Christmas. And I'm afraid this year I do mean little. But with the vaccine and all the other measures that we're taking, we do know that things will be better in this country by Easter. And I'm sure that next year, Christmas will be as normal, as usual, for every family in the country.
What utter clowns. Boris Johnson there trying to save face after another half-assed U-turn. The whole thing's utter nonsense. Obviously, we shouldn't be in this position in the first place. They've obviously been taken into a dark room by Patrick Vallance and Chris Whitty and shown some scary numbers again. And they're like, well, we can't cancel Christmas now. And they're like, yeah, okay, we're letting you do all this stuff, but please don't do it, sort of thing. Which is ridiculous, because this is what should have been said in the first place. And we're keeping 5 days, we're keeping 3 households, and, you know, you had ministers going on the news saying, I'll be spending Christmas with my elderly, parents-in-law, etc., etc. And now we're changing. So these idiots have no idea what they're doing. Get in gear. That's my message. Get in gear and sort this out. This isn't leadership. Does this sound like leadership to you?
We do know that things will be better. And I'm sure that next year...
Can't find the clip. Where does he say a merry little Christmas? That's what I was looking for. Hang on.
I'm afraid this year have yourselves a merry little Christmas.
Is that leadership?
Yourselves a merry little Christmas.
That's not leadership. Okay? That's not leadership. Thank you for listening to Mesme Politics today. I'm Toby Lepati Mesme. I will be back tomorrow, 7 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Probably won't be as long as this one because of Pmqs. It was a bit more than the usual half an hour. We're nearly 45 minutes. Hope you enjoyed this bumper edition. I'll see you very soon.